The morning sun painted golden streaks across Riverside Heights' pristine sidewalks as Mark Thompson's silver SUV pulled into Sunshine Grove Daycare's parking lot. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with apprehension. In the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of his 4-year-old daughter Sophie, her copper curls bouncing as she hummed along to her favorite cartoon theme song, blissfully unaware of her father's nervous energy. "Ready for your first day at the new daycare, princess?" Mark's voice carried forced cheerfulness as he helped Sophie out of her car seat. The truth was, this wasn't just another daycare. Sunshine Grove was the most prestigious early childhood center in the city, with a 2-year waiting list that Mark had somehow managed to bypass thanks to his growing reputation as a celebrity photographer. Sophie clutched her stuffed giraffe, Mr. Spots, while skipping alongside her father. Her yellow dress matched the cheerful daisies decorating the daycare's entrance, making her look like she belonged there already. "Daddy, will they have the special cookies like Ms. Rodriguez used to make?" Mark's heart clenched at the mention of their old daycare, which they'd left behind when they moved to this upscale neighborhood. "Maybe something even better, sweetheart. And look, they have a butterfly garden." He pointed to the meticulously maintained garden that flanked the entrance, hoping to distract her from thoughts of their old life. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing an interior that looked more like a high-end preschool than a daycare. The walls were adorned with children's artwork framed in simple wooden frames, giving each piece the respect of a masterwork. The reception area smelled of lavender and clean linens, a far cry from the cheerful chaos of their previous daycare. "Good morning. You must be Mr. Thompson and little Sophie." The receptionist's warm voice matched her genuine smile. "I'm Mrs. Chen. We're so excited to have you join our Sunshine Grove family." She rose from her desk, her silk blouse rustling as she moved to greet them properly. Mark was about to respond when a melodic laugh floated down the hallway, followed by the patter of small feet and excited chatter. Something about that laugh made his heart skip a beat, a familiar sensation he couldn't quite place. Sophie's grip on his hands suddenly tightened, her blue eyes widening with recognition as she spotted someone approaching from the corridor. "And this is Miss Sarah, who'll be Sophie's primary caregiver in the butterfly room," Mrs. Chen announced, gesturing to the woman who had just appeared. Mark's world tilted on its axis. There, standing before him in a pristine powder blue uniform, was Sarah Lawrence, the same Sarah Lawrence whose photograph had been carefully tucked away in his wallet for the past 5 years. The same Sarah whose image he'd captured at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala, where she'd been volunteering rather than walking the runway like the other models. The same Sarah who'd spent 3 hours helping him entertain sick children with his camera, making them feel like supermodels and superheroes, before disappearing into the night without sharing her number. But before Mark could process this cosmic coincidence, Sophie's voice rang out with the pure, unfiltered honesty that only a child could muster. "I know you. Daddy has your picture in his wallet." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's professional smile froze, her emerald eyes widening slightly as they darted between Sophie and Mark. Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose with interest, though she tactfully pretended to be engrossed in her computer screen. Mark felt heat crawling up his neck, knowing his face must be turning an impressive shade of red. How could he explain this without sounding like a stalker? The truth, that he'd kept the candid photo he'd taken of Sarah laughing with a young cancer patient because it captured the purest form of joy he'd ever seen, seemed inadequate in the face of his daughter's innocent exposure. Sarah was the first to break the silence, her voice carrying a hint of amusement mixed with genuine curiosity. "Is that so, Sophie? I'd love to hear more about that picture while we check out the butterfly garden. Would that be okay, Mr. Thompson?" Mark managed to nod, still struggling to find his voice. As Sarah led Sophie toward the garden, he could hear his daughter's excited chatter. "It's the pretty picture where you're wearing a purple dress and making butterfly shadows on the wall. Daddy says it's his favorite because it shows real magic." His daughter's voice faded as they disappeared through the glass doors, leaving Mark to deal with the paperwork and his racing thoughts. Mrs. Chen slid a stack of forms across the desk, her eyes twinkling with poorly concealed interest. She seems quite taken with Miss Sarah already. Though it appears she's not the only one. Mark cleared his throat, focusing intently on the emergency contact form before him. I'm a photographer. The picture Sophie mentioned, it's from a charity event where Sarah was volunteering. She did amazing work with the kids there. He paused, pen hovering over the paper. I had no idea she worked here. Mrs. Chen's smile softened. Miss Sarah came to us 3 years ago, trading the runway for story time. Best decision our center ever made. The children adore her. She hesitated before adding, though we do have a strict policy regarding personal relationships between staff and parents. Mark's head snapped up. Oh, no, that's not. We don't have a relationship. We barely spoke at the event. It's just a coincidence. Even as he said it, he knew how unconvincing it sounded. How could he explain that he'd spent 5 years wondering about the beautiful model who'd chosen to spend her free time bringing joy to sick children? That he'd kept her photo not out of any inappropriate obsession, but as a reminder that genuine goodness existed in the world? Through the garden windows, he could see Sarah kneeling beside Sophie, pointing out something in the butterfly garden. His daughter was beaming, already completely at ease with her new caregiver. Sarah glanced up, catching his eye for a moment, and offered a small, knowing smile that made his heart race. As he finished the paperwork, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully structured world was about to change dramatically. Sophie's innocent revelation had cracked open a door he'd kept firmly shut for years, and now he had to navigate the complicated waters of single parenthood, professional boundaries, and unexpected second chances. When Sarah returned with Sophie, the little girl was clutching a carefully colored butterfly drawing. Look, Daddy. Miss Sarah helped me make it just like the real ones in the garden. Her excitement was contagious, but Mark noticed she was still holding the drawing away from him. It's not finished though. Miss Sarah said we can add glitter tomorrow. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Mark crouched down to Sophie's level, grateful for the distraction. So you're okay staying here today? You feel comfortable with Miss Sarah? Sophie nodded enthusiastically. She knows all about butterflies, Daddy. And she promised to show me how to make shadow puppets like in your picture. Sarah's cheeks colored slightly at the mention of the photograph again, but her professional demeanor never wavered. Sophie will be just fine, Mr. Thompson. We have a full day planned, including some photography activities that I think she'll especially enjoy, given her father's profession. The knowing look in her eyes told Mark she remembered that day at the hospital too. As he prepared to leave, Sarah handed him a packet of information about the day's activities. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending an electric current through his body that he hadn't felt since his late wife was alive. Have a wonderful first day, Sophie, he managed to say, hugging his daughter goodbye. As he walked toward the exit, he heard Sarah's voice one last time, "Don't worry, Mr. Thompson. Your secret's safe with us." He turned back just in time to see her wink at Sophie, who giggled conspiratorially. In that moment, Mark realized that his daughter's innocent words hadn't just exposed his long-held secret, they'd opened the door to possibilities he'd never dared to imagine. As he walked to his car, he couldn't help but wonder if sometimes the most profound truths really did come from the mouths of babes. Sarah Lawrence sat in her small office at Sunshine Grove Daycare long after the children had gone home, staring at her reflection in the darkened computer screen. Her fingers absently traced the butterfly pendant at her throat, a reminder of her past life and the decision that had changed everything. The same pendant she'd worn the day she met Mark Thompson at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala. 5 years ago, she'd been Sarah Lawrence, the face of luxury brands and high-fashion magazines. The modeling world had branded her as the angel of the runway for her ethereal looks and signature white blonde hair. But behind the glamorous facade lay a woman increasingly haunted by the superficiality of her existence. Each photo shoot, each runway show, felt like another piece of her soul being traded for empty acclaim. The change had come during that fateful charity event. She'd originally planned to make the usual celebrity appearance, smile for photos, write a check, and leave early for another engagement. Instead, she'd found herself drawn into Mark Thompson's impromptu photo session with the young cancer patients. His genuine warmth and ability to make each child feel like a star had awakened something in her she thought she'd lost, pure, unfiltered joy. A knock at her office door startled her from her reverie. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway, concern etched on her face. "Sarah? It's nearly 7. You should head home." Sarah managed a small smile. "Just finishing up some paperwork." They both knew it was a lie. The real reason she'd stayed late was sitting in her bag, a worn magazine article from 5 years ago, featuring Mark Thompson's rising star in the world of photography. She'd kept it all these years, just as he'd kept her photo. "He's different than you expected, isn't he?" Mrs. Chen's perceptive comment made Sarah's head snap up. The older woman continued, "I saw how you looked at each other this morning. Like two people who've been searching for something without realizing what it was." Sarah sighed, running her fingers through her now shoulder-length hair, another change from her modeling days. "It doesn't matter. You know the policy about staff-parent relationships. Besides, his daughter is in my care. It would be inappropriate." "Rules exist for good reasons," Mrs. Chen acknowledged, settling into the chair across from Sarah's desk. "But sometimes life has its own plans. Tell me about that day at the hospital." The memories flooded back as Sarah began to speak. She told Mrs. Chen about how Mark had transformed a sterile hospital playroom into a magical studio, using simple bed sheets and creativity to create fantastical backgrounds for the children. How he'd noticed her standing awkwardly to the side and enlisted her help, teaching her to create shadow puppets that delighted the young patients. How, for the first time in years, she'd felt truly seen, not for her face or figure, but for the joy she could bring to others. "That photo Sophie mentioned," Sarah continued, her voice soft with remembrance, "I never knew he'd taken it. I was helping a little girl named Maya make butterfly shadows on the wall. She was so excited to show her mother when she woke up from surgery. I laughed at something Maya said, and I guess that's when Mark captured the moment." Mrs. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "And you never saw each other again after that day?" "No." Sarah's fingers returned to her butterfly pendant. "I left early. My agent was furious that I'd spent 3 hours playing with kids instead of networking with potential clients. A week later, I canceled all my upcoming contracts and enrolled in early childhood education courses. My agent said I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was, but it was the kind that puts you back together." The silence that followed was broken by the distant sound of the cleaning crew's vacuum. Mrs. Chen stood, straightening her blazer. "Life rarely gives us second chances without a reason, Sarah. Just, be careful. Whatever happens, the children come first." After Mrs. Chen left, Sarah pulled out her phone, opening her photos to a hidden album. There, saved from an online article about the charity event, was a picture of her and Mark working together with the children. In it, they were both focused on helping a young boy pose like a superhero, neither aware of being photographed. The caption read, "Celebrity model Sarah Lawrence assists local photographer Mark Thompson in bringing magic to young patients." Meanwhile, across town, Mark Thompson sat in his home office, Sophie's words from that morning echoing in his mind. On his computer screen was a folder he hadn't opened in years, Hospital Charity Gala. His cursor hovered over it before he finally clicked, revealing hundreds of photos from that day. He scrolled until he found it, the picture that had captured his heart. Sarah, caught in mid-laugh, her hands creating butterfly shadows while a small girl looked on in wonder. The joy in her expression was unlike anything he'd seen in her professional modeling photos. This was raw, real, beautiful in its authenticity. "Daddy?" Sophie's voice came from the doorway. She stood there in her butterfly pajamas, clutching Mr. Spots. "Are you looking at Miss Sarah's picture again?" Mark quickly minimized the window, but not before Sophie had padded over to his desk. "Sweetheart, shouldn't you be in bed?" "I can't sleep." She climbed onto his lap, her small fingers reaching for the mouse. "Can we look at the butterfly picture? Miss Sarah showed me how to make shadows just like in it today." Mark hesitated before reopening the folder. Together, they looked at the photo that had meant so much to him over the years. "Daddy," Sophie said thoughtfully, "Miss Sarah has the same necklace now as she did in the picture. The butterfly one." His breath caught. He hadn't noticed that detail before, but Sophie was right. The delicate silver pendant had been visible in the photo, and Sarah had indeed been wearing it at the daycare. "You're very observant, princess." She said it helps her remember important things. Sophie yawned, snuggling against his chest. "Like how butterflies have to be brave to change and fly. Are you going to marry her like in the stories?" Mark's heart skipped a beat at his daughter's innocent question. "Sophie, honey, it's not that simple. Miss Sarah is your teacher, and there are rules about things like that." "But you keep her picture because she's magic," Sophie insisted sleepily. "And she kept her butterfly necklace because you helped her find her wings. She told me so today." Mark's arms tightened around his drowsy daughter, his mind racing. Had Sarah really said that? What did it mean? The photograph on his screen seemed to hold new mysteries, new possibilities he'd never dared to consider. As he carried Sophie back to bed, his phone buzzed with a notification. An email from Sunshine Grove Daycare, specifically from Sarah's professional account, "Mr. Thompson, regarding Sophie's integration into the butterfly room, could we schedule a parent-teacher conference this week? There are some matters I believe we should discuss. Formal, professional, proper." Yet Mark couldn't help but notice she'd sent it well outside normal business hours. As he tucked Sophie in, his daughter mumbled something that sounded suspiciously like "happily ever after" before drifting off to sleep. Mark returned to his office, staring at the email as he contemplated his response. Outside, a moth fluttered against his window, drawn to the light within. He wondered if it too had once been a caterpillar, forced to brave the darkness of its chrysalis before emerging transformed. Sometimes, he realized, the most beautiful changes required the courage to break free from the safety of what we know. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he considered how to respond to Sarah's email, knowing that whatever he wrote would be the beginning of a new chapter in all their lives. The photograph on his screen seemed to watch him, a moment of pure joy frozen in time, waiting to be brought back to life. The parent-teacher conference room at Sunshine Grove Daycare had never felt smaller than it did on that Wednesday afternoon. Mark sat across from Sarah, the polished wooden table between them seeming both too wide and not wide enough. The steady ticking of the wall clock punctuated the professional distance they struggled to maintain. "Sophie's adjustment to the butterfly room has been remarkable," Sarah began, her voice carrying the practiced tone of countless parent-teacher conferences. Yet there was an undertone of something else, a slight tremor that betrayed her composed exterior. "She's particularly excelling in our creative expression activities." Mark nodded, trying to focus on the portfolio of Sophie's artwork spread between them rather than the way Sarah's butterfly pendant caught the afternoon light. "She talks about you constantly at home. Especially about the shadow puppet sessions." A small smile tugged at Sarah's lips before she caught herself. "Mr. Thompson." "Mark," he interrupted softly. "Please." "Mark," she conceded, her professional facade cracking slightly. "We need to address the situation. The other parents are talking. This morning, Mrs. Bradford suggested to Mrs. Chen that there might be impropriety in Sophie's placement in my class. The word hung heavy in the air between them. Outside the conference room, children's laughter echoed down the hallway, a stark contrast to the tension within. Through the window, Mark could see the butterfly garden where Sophie had first recognized Sarah, where everything had begun to unravel. "I can request a transfer to another class," Sarah offered, though the words seemed to pain her. "Miss Johnson in the Rainbow Room has an opening." "No," Mark said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Sophie adores you. She's thriving here. I won't disrupt her happiness because of gossip." "It's not just gossip anymore." Sarah pushed a tablet across the table. On the screen was a local community Facebook group, where someone had posted about the famous model-turned-teacher and her suspicious connection to a certain prestigious photographer parent. Mark's jaw tightened as he read the comments. "This is ridiculous. We met once, 5 years ago, at a charity event. We didn't even exchange numbers. But you kept my photo," Sarah said quietly. "And I kept the article about you." The admission hung between them like a fragile butterfly, waiting to either take flight or be crushed. Before either could speak again, a knock at the door made them both jump. Mrs. Chen entered, her expression grave. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation." She looked between them apologetically. "The Bradford family is threatening to withdraw their twins unless we address their concerns about this." "This?" Mark echoed, frustration coloring his voice. "There is no this. We're having a standard parent-teacher conference about my daughter's progress." Mrs. Chen's expression softened. "I know that. But perception matters in our community. The Bradfords are influential. If they leave, others might follow." Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'll resign. It's the simplest solution." "Absolutely not," Mark and Mrs. Chen said simultaneously. "Sarah," Mrs. Chen continued gently, "you're the best teacher we've ever had. The children adore you. We're not losing you over baseless gossip." Just then, a commotion erupted from the playground. Through the window, they could see Sophie standing atop the climbing dome, her arms spread wide. "Look, Miss Sarah. I'm a butterfly. I'm brave enough to fly." All three adults rushed to the window, hearts in their throats. Sarah was already moving toward the door when Sophie's foot slipped. Mark's world seemed to slow down as he watched his daughter begin to fall. But Sarah was already there, somehow covering the distance from the building to the playground in seconds. She caught Sophie just before she hit the ground, both of them tumbling onto the safety mat in a tangle of limbs and scared tears. Mark ran to them, his heart pounding. By the time he reached the playground, a small crowd had gathered, teachers, children, and the very parents who had been whispering behind their hands moments before. "I'm okay, Daddy," Sophie sniffled from Sarah's arms. "Miss Sarah saved me. Just like you said she was magic." Sarah looked up at Mark, her professional mask completely gone now, replaced by genuine concern and something deeper, something that made his heart race for entirely different reasons. Mrs. Bradford pushed through the crowd, her twins clutching her designer skirt. She looked at Sarah, still holding Sophie protectively, then at her own children who were watching their beloved teacher with worried expressions. "Miss Lawrence," Mrs. Bradford said stiffly. Thank you. That was incredibly quick thinking." "It's my job," Sarah replied simply, finally releasing Sophie into Mark's waiting arms. "Every child in my care is precious to me." The moment seemed to shift something in the atmosphere. Mrs. Bradford's expression softened as she watched her twins run to hug Sarah, their earlier playground game forgotten in their concern for their teacher. Back in the conference room an hour later, after the excitement had died down and Sophie was safely engrossed in an art project with her classmates, Mark, Sarah, and Mrs. Chen sat in thoughtful silence. "Perhaps," Mrs. Chen said finally, "we've been approaching this all wrong." "Sarah, your past as a model and your connection with Mark, however brief, isn't something to hide. It's a beautiful story about choosing to follow your heart and make a difference in children's lives. The photo, Mark added quietly. The one I kept. It wasn't about celebrity or attraction. It was about capturing a moment of pure joy, of someone choosing kindness over glamour. That's why I kept it. That's what I wanted Sophie to see, that real beauty comes from the heart. Sarah's fingers found her butterfly pendant, a habit Mark was beginning to recognize as her way of grounding herself. The necklace, she said. The day at the hospital, watching you with those children, it showed me who I could be. The butterfly became my reminder that change is possible, that beauty isn't about how you look, but about how you transform the world around you. Mrs. Chen smiled, pulling out a folder. Then perhaps it's time we transformed how we handle these situations. I've drafted a new policy about personal relationships between staff and parents. It's more nuanced, focusing on professional conduct and the children's well-being rather than blanket prohibitions. She slid the document across the table. Of course, any relationship would need to be disclosed and monitored to ensure it doesn't affect the children. But perhaps it's time Sunshine Grove recognized that love, in all its forms, can make our community stronger. Mark and Sarah exchanged glances, years of unspoken feelings passing between them. Outside, butterflies danced in the garden, their delicate wings catching the late afternoon sun. Somewhere in the building, Sophie was probably telling her friends about her adventure on the climbing dome, adding it to the story she seemed to know was still unfolding. So, Mrs. Chen said, standing with a knowing smile, shall we discuss how to move forward? After all, the best stories are those that teach our children about courage, transformation, and the magic of being true to your heart. As she left them alone in the conference room, a butterfly landed on the window sill, its wings slowly opening and closing, reminding them that sometimes the most beautiful changes happen only when we're brave enough to spread our wings and trust in the journey ahead. The autumn storm that battered Riverside Heights seemed to mirror the turmoil within Sunshine Grove Daycare's walls. Rain lashed against windows decorated with children's artwork, while thunder rolled ominously overhead. Inside her classroom, Sarah watched her students during nap time, their peaceful faces a stark contrast to the chaos both outside and within her heart. A week had passed since the playground incident, and despite Mrs. Chen's progressive new policy draft, the situation had grown more complex. Local mommy blogs had picked up the story, spinning wild theories about the former model and the photographer. Some praised the romantic angle, calling it a real-life fairy tale. Others questioned the daycare's judgment in allowing what they termed an inappropriate relationship to develop. Sarah's phone buzzed silently in her pocket, another message from her old modeling agent. The story had somehow reached the fashion world, and now magazines were clamoring for interviews about the runway angel's secret love story. The very publicity she'd fled from 5 years ago was threatening to overwhelm her carefully constructed new life. A small voice broke through her reverie. "Miss Sarah? I had the butterfly dream again." Sophie sat up on her nap mat, clutching Mr. Spots. The other children slept on as Sarah knelt beside her student, beside Mark's daughter, which was part of the whole complicated mess. "The good dream or the scary one?" Sarah whispered, though she already knew the answer. Sophie had been having the same dream all week. "The one where I'm falling," Sophie murmured. "But this time, you didn't catch me. You were gone, like Mommy." Sarah's heart clenched. She gathered Sophie into her arms, conscious of crossing another professional boundary but unable to deny comfort to this child who had unwittingly started it all. "I'm right here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." But even as she said it, Sarah knew it might be a promise she couldn't keep. Earlier that morning, she'd received an email from the daycare's board of directors. Despite Mrs. Chen's support, they wanted an emergency meeting to discuss recent events and their impact on the institution's reputation. The storm intensified as the afternoon wore on. Parents arrived early to collect their children, worried about the weather. Sarah handed out artwork and gave weather-appropriate warnings with her usual warm efficiency, all while feeling increasingly like a performer in a play, exactly what she'd left the modeling world to escape. Mark arrived last, as always, looking windswept and worried. "Sophie's still napping," Sarah told him professionally, conscious of Mrs. Bradford watching from the doorway as she collected the twins. "The storm's been making some of the children anxious." As if in response, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the building. The lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged the daycare into darkness. Children's frightened cries filled the air, and Sarah immediately switched into crisis mode. "Everyone stay calm," she called out, her voice steady and reassuring. "Mr. Thompson, could you use your phone's flashlight to check on Sophie? Mrs. Bradford, there are emergency lights in the supply closet." But before anyone could move, a more immediate crisis presented itself. Water began seeping under the classroom door. The storm drain must have backed up. Within seconds, the seepage turned into a steady flow. "The basement." Mrs. Chen's voice carried from the hallway. "The children's winter concert costumes are stored down there." The costumes represented months of work and parent contributions. Without thinking about appearances or propriety, Sarah kicked off her shoes and ran toward the basement stairs. Mark close behind her. They could hear Mrs. Chen calling about waiting for maintenance, but the water was rising too quickly. The basement was already ankle-deep when they reached it. In the beam of Mark's phone light, they could see the costume racks against the far wall, dangerously close to the rising water. Working together, they began moving costumes to higher ground. "Just like old times," Mark said softly as they worked, referring to their synchronized efforts at the hospital years ago. "You always did know how to handle a crisis." "This is different," Sarah replied, though she couldn't help but smile. "No cameras this time." "No," he agreed, helping her lift a particularly heavy rack. "No pretenses either." They worked in efficient silence for several minutes, the sound of rushing water and distant thunder their only accompaniment. When the last costume was safe, they turned to find the water had risen significantly. The stairs were now partially submerged. "Mark," Sarah said quietly, "if I leave Sunshine Grove, don't." His voice was fierce in the darkness. "Don't let them push you out of another life you love. The board meeting tomorrow. I'll be there. We'll face them together. Tell them the truth, all of it." A crash from upstairs, followed by children's screams, cut their conversation short. They rushed back up the flooding stairs to find chaos in the classroom. A large branch had broken through one of the windows, letting in rain and wind. Glass sparkled dangerously on the floor while teachers tried to coax frightened children away from the hazard. Sophie stood frozen in the middle of the room, her eyes wide with terror. "Daddy!" "Miss Sarah!" Without hesitation, Sarah scooped her up, shielding her from both the wind and the sight of the broken window. Mark quickly helped the other teachers guide children to the emergency assembly point in the interior hallway. Mrs. Bradford appeared with emergency lights, illuminating a scene that could have been disastrous but was instead a testament to quick thinking and teamwork. Sarah still held Sophie, who refused to let go, while Mark coordinated with maintenance on the phone. Other parents began arriving, alerted by the daycare's emergency system. Hours later, after the storm had passed and the immediate crisis had been handled, Sarah sat in her now empty classroom. The window was boarded up, the water had been pumped out, and the costumes were safe. But tomorrow's board meeting still loomed. A knock at the door revealed Mark, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this." "Sophie's with Mrs. Chen, helping to sort the salvaged art supplies. She's remarkably resilient," Sarah said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Like her father." "Like her teacher," Mark countered, sitting beside her. "Sarah, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know." "Miss Lawrence?" Mrs. Bradford's voice interrupted from the doorway. Both Sarah and Mark stood quickly, but Mrs. Bradford held up a hand. "The other parents and I have been talking," she said, stepping into the classroom. "We saw how you both handled the crisis today. How you put the children's safety first, worked together without drama or inappropriate behavior. I was wrong to suggest there was anything untoward happening here." She pulled out her phone, showing them the mommy blog posts about the situation. "We've all withdrawn our complaints to the board. And we've posted our own story, about two people who put their personal feelings aside for years, who only reconnected by chance, and who have consistently shown that they care more about our children's well-being than their own happiness." Sarah's hand found her butterfly pendant, clinging to it like an anchor in a storm of emotions. Mark moved closer, not quite touching her but offering silent support. Mrs. Bradford smiled softly. "The board meeting tomorrow? It's no longer about disciplinary action. It's about updating policies for the modern world, where love and professionalism aren't mutually exclusive. Mrs. Chen asked me to tell you, that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is allow ourselves to be caught when we're falling." After she left, Mark and Sarah stood in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the storm clouds in shades of gold and purple. In the butterfly garden, despite the day's tempest, delicate wings still fluttered between rain-washed flowers, proving that sometimes the most fragile things are also the strongest. "So," Mark said finally, "about that conversation we never finished 5 years ago." Sarah turned to face him, her butterfly pendant catching the last rays of sunlight. "I think," she said softly, "it's time we both stopped waiting in our separate cocoons. The storm's passed. Maybe it's time to fly." The morning of the board meeting dawned clear and bright, as if the previous day's storm had washed away more than just fallen leaves and broken branches. Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror, fingers trembling slightly as she fastened her butterfly pendant. For the first time in years, she found herself thinking about the runway, about how she used to prepare for moments when all eyes would be on her. This felt infinitely more important. Her phone chimed with a text from Mark. "Sophie insisted on wearing her butterfly dress today. Says it's for good luck. We believe in you." The simple message steadied her nerves. When she arrived at Sunshine Grove, the parking lot was unusually full for early morning. Parents were gathering in small groups, their children playing together on the newly inspected playground equipment. As Sarah walked toward the entrance, conversations hushed, then resumed with warm smiles and encouraging nods. Mrs. Chen met her at the door, beaming. "You might want to see the butterfly garden before the meeting." Curious, Sarah followed her around the building. There, tied to the garden fence, were dozens of paper butterflies. Each one bore a message, some in children's wobbly handwriting, others in parents' more polished script. "We love Miss Sarah. Best teacher ever. Our butterfly angel." "The families organized it last night," Mrs. Chen explained, watching Sarah's eyes fill with tears. Even the Bradfords stayed late to help Sophie hang her butterflies. Sarah reached out to touch one particularly sparkly creation. The message read, "Thank you for teaching us that change is beautiful. Love, the Bradford twins." Inside the building, the board meeting room was transformed. Instead of the formal arrangement she'd expected, the space had been set up in a circle, creating an atmosphere of equality rather than judgment. Board members mingled with parents, teachers, and, surprisingly, several children who had apparently insisted on being present. Sophie broke away from Mark's side the moment she saw Sarah, running to hug her teacher's legs. "Look, Miss Sarah. We match." She twirled in her butterfly dress, then pointed to Sarah's pendant. "Daddy says we're all here to make sure you can stay and help more kids learn to fly." The board chairman, Dr. Harrison, cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps we should begin. Miss Lawrence, Mr. Thompson, if you'll join us." As everyone settled into their seats, Sarah noticed something remarkable. The usual power dynamics of such meetings, the subtle hierarchies and political posturing, were notably absent. Instead, there was an atmosphere of community, of shared purpose. "We've reviewed the situation extensively," Dr. Harrison began, including the events of yesterday's storm. "Mrs. Bradford has been particularly eloquent in presenting the parents' revised perspective." Mrs. Bradford stood, her usually perfect composure softened by genuine emotion. "When I first raised concerns about Miss Lawrence and Mr. Thompson's prior connection, I was thinking as someone who'd seen too many scandals in our community. But yesterday, watching them work together to protect our children and our school, I realized I was viewing love as a liability rather than the asset it truly is." She turned to address Sarah directly. "You left a world of glamour and fame to nurture our children. That same dedication showed yesterday when you ran toward danger instead of away from it. How can we punish that kind of commitment?" Sophie, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up from her seat between Mark and Sarah. "Can I tell them about the hospital story, Daddy?" All eyes turned to Mark, who nodded encouragingly. Sophie stood, clutching Mr. Spots for courage. "Before Miss Sarah was our teacher, she helped my daddy make sick kids happy. He kept her picture because it showed how people can be beautiful on the inside. And she kept her butterfly necklace because it reminded her to be brave and help others. That's not a bad thing, is it?" The simple wisdom of a child's perspective seemed to touch everyone in the room. Dr. Harrison smiled warmly. "No, Sophie, it's not a bad thing at all. In fact, it's helped us realize that our policies need to evolve." He produced a document that Sarah recognized as Mrs. Chen's draft policy. "We've reviewed and refined this proposal. Instead of blanket prohibitions on personal relationships between staff and parents, we're implementing guidelines that focus on professional conduct and the children's well-being." The meeting transformed into a collaborative discussion about the future of Sunshine Grove. Parents shared ideas about incorporating more of Sarah's creative approaches into the curriculum. Teachers suggested ways to better involve parents in the classroom. Even the children contributed, with Sophie leading a surprisingly passionate argument for more butterfly-themed activities. As the meeting drew to a close, Dr. Harrison had one final announcement. "Miss Lawrence, in light of your demonstrated dedication and innovative teaching methods, we'd like to offer you a new position, Director of Creative Education. You'll help implement these new approaches across all our classes while maintaining your primary role with the Butterfly Room." Sarah's hand flew to her pendant, overwhelmed. She felt Mark's supportive presence beside her, saw Sophie's excited bouncing, and knew that sometimes the greatest transformations come when we stop fighting change and embrace it instead. Later that afternoon, as the children enjoyed a celebratory butterfly release in the garden, Mrs. Bradford's idea, Sarah found a quiet moment with Mark. "5 years ago," she said softly, "I ran away from the cameras because I wanted something real. I never imagined finding it would mean ending up in front of your lens that day." Mark took her hand, both of them watching Sophie chase butterflies with her friends. "I kept that photo because it captured the moment someone chose to be truly themselves. I never imagined Sophie would be the one to help me find you again." Speaking of Sophie, Sarah smiled. "She asked me this morning if this means she gets to be the flower girl." Mark laughed, then grew serious. "We should probably start with dinner first." "Tomorrow night?" "As long as you promise not to keep any more photos in your wallet without telling me," Sarah teased. "Deal," he agreed. "Though I should warn you, Sophie's already planning our wedding colors. Apparently, everything has to be butterfly-themed." Their laughter joined the sounds of children's joy and fluttering wings. Above them, a monarch butterfly danced in the sunlight, its transformation complete, its beauty made more magnificent by the journey it took to emerge. Mrs. Chen watched from the doorway as Sarah and Mark stood together, surrounded by the community that had chosen to embrace love rather than fear it. Sometimes, she murmured to herself, the most beautiful stories are the ones that remind us it's never too late to spread our wings and soar. 1 year later, Sunshine Grove Daycare's annual Spring Festival was transformed into a celebration that no one in Riverside Heights would soon forget. The Butterfly Garden, now 3 times its original size, buzzed with activity as children darted between blooming flowers, their handmade wings catching the morning light. Sarah stood at the entrance, her butterfly pendant now accompanied by a small diamond ring that caught the sunlight in similar ways. She watched as Mark photographed the celebration, capturing the same kind of pure joy that had brought them together 6 years ago at a hospital charity event. "Miss Sarah! Miss Sarah!" Sophie came running up, her own wings slightly askew from enthusiastic playing. "Can we tell them the story now? Please." That story had become something of a legend at Sunshine Grove. New parents would often hear whispers of it during tours, and children would beg to hear it during story time. But today was special, today they would tell it together, as a family. The festival crowd gathered around the storytelling circle, a new addition to the garden that Sarah had designed as part of her creative education program. Parents settled onto benches while children sprawled on cushions shaped like flower petals. Mark joined them, his camera temporarily set aside, as Sophie took her place beside Sarah. Once upon a time, Sophie began with practiced enthusiasm. There was a beautiful butterfly who didn't know she was a butterfly. Sarah smiled, picking up the thread. She spent her days flying from flower to flower in a big city, looking beautiful but feeling empty inside. Until one day, she met a photographer who showed her that true beauty comes from helping others spread their wings. "That's my daddy," Sophie interjected proudly, causing ripples of laughter through the audience. Mark continued the tale, his photographer's eye catching the way Sarah's eyes sparkled as he spoke. The photographer kept a picture of the butterfly's true smile, hoping that someday his little caterpillar would learn about transformation from it. "That's me," Sophie announced. "I was the caterpillar who recognized the butterfly at my daycare. Because Daddy had her picture in his wallet." Mrs. Bradford's twins, now proud kindergartners, chimed in from their spot in the front row. "Tell them about the storm. That's the best part." The story unfolded with multiple voices now, each adding their perspective to the tale that had changed their community. Mrs. Chen spoke about watching love bloom despite professional boundaries. Mrs. Bradford admitted her initial fears and how they'd transformed into understanding. Children shared their favorite parts, especially the dramatic storm rescue. As they concluded the story, Sarah revealed a surprise. "And now, Sunshine Grove has a new program to share with you all." She gestured to a table where brochures were stacked neatly. "The Butterfly Effect Initiative." Mark stepped forward to explain. "Starting next month, we'll be partnering with Children's Hospital to bring the magic of Sunshine Grove to kids who can't attend regular daycare. Sarah will be leading creative workshops, and I'll be there to capture their transformations, just like I did 6 years ago. And I'm helping too," Sophie announced. "I'm going to teach them how to make butterfly shadows and be brave." The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. Parents were already reaching for the brochures, asking how they could contribute. The Bradford twins were demonstrating their shadow puppet techniques to younger children. Even Mr. Spots, Sophie's well-loved giraffe, sported a new pair of butterfly wings for the occasion. After the formal presentations, as families enjoyed the festival activities, Sarah found a quiet moment with Mark and Sophie near the original butterfly bush where their story had begun. "Did you ever imagine," she asked Mark softly, "that one photo could lead to all this?" Mark wrapped an arm around her waist, watching Sophie show a group of younger children how to create butterfly shadows in the late afternoon sun. "I imagined every possible scenario except the real one, our daughter playing matchmaker." "Our daughter," Sarah repeated, the words still new and wonderful on her tongue. The adoption papers had been finalized just last week, making official what their hearts had known for months. Sophie bounced back to them, her wings slightly more crooked but her smile brighter than ever. "Daddy, can we show them the new picture now?" Mark pulled out his wallet, but instead of the old photo from the hospital, he removed a fresh one taken just last month. In it, Sarah and Sophie sat in the butterfly garden, both laughing as actual butterflies landed on their outstretched hands. It captured the same pure joy as the original photo, but now with the added depth of family, of belonging, of dreams taking flight. "You know," Mrs. Chen said, joining them with a knowing smile, "they say when a butterfly flaps its wings, it can cause a hurricane on the other side of the world. I think sometimes it can cause a love story instead." The festival continued around them, a celebration not just of spring but of transformation itself. The Butterfly Effect Initiative brochures were already half gone, with parents and teachers eagerly signing up to volunteer. The Bradford twins had organized an impromptu shadow puppet show, retelling their version of The Butterfly Teacher and the Picture Daddy to an enthralled audience. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the garden, Sarah gathered everyone for one final surprise. Hundreds of paper butterflies were distributed, each containing a seed packet and a simple message: "Plant your own transformation." Because every story plants a seed, Sarah explained to the crowd. Every act of kindness, every moment of bravery, every choice to see the beauty in change, they all create ripples that touch lives we might never know about. Sophie tugged on Mark's sleeve. "Daddy, can you take our picture? All of us together." Mark set up his camera on a timer and joined his family. Just as the shutter clicked, a real butterfly landed on Sophie's nose, making her giggle. The moment was captured perfectly, not just a photograph, but a testament to the magic that happens when you're brave enough to emerge from your cocoon and trust in the possibility of flight. Later that night, as they hung the new photo alongside the original one from the hospital, Sarah touched her butterfly pendant thoughtfully. "You know, I never did tell you where this necklace came from." Mark and Sophie looked at her expectantly, settling onto the couch for one more story. "It was a gift from a little girl at the hospital that day," Sarah revealed. "After you left, she told me that butterflies are just caterpillars who believed in magic. She said I needed to believe too." She smiled at her family. "I think she was right." Sophie yawned, snuggling between them. "Can we plant our seeds tomorrow? I want to grow our own butterfly garden at home." "Of course, sweetheart," Mark said, sharing a loving look with Sarah over their daughter's head. After all, the best stories never really end, they just keep growing, one wing beat at a time. Outside their window, in the gentle spring night, butterflies danced among the flowers in the garden they'd planted together, their wings catching the moonlight like promises of more magic to come.